Thank you, everyone. I'm David Newville, and delighted to have Gene Sperling joining us today. Before we dive into our fireside chat and our questions, I'll briefly introduce Gene and kind of provide a little bit of background about our collaboration on the Advanced Child Tax Credit. So those of you who are not familiar with Gene, he is the White House American Rescue Plan Coordinator and Senior Advisor to the President. He also previously served as Director of the National Economic Council and National Economic Advisor to both President Obama and President Clinton. He is the only person to hold that position for two presidents. And very relevant to today's discussion, he played a lead role under Presidents Clinton and Obama in the significant expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit and several other refundable tax relief proposals for hard-pressed families. Bob Greenstein, the founder of the Senate Budget and Policy Priorities, said of Gene's work, there is no administration official who did more over the past 20 years to dramatically expand tax credits for low-income workers. If anybody who knows who Bob Greenstein is knows that's very high praise, so we're delighted to have Gene here today. So Gene, we first began talking after the historic passage of the American Rescue Plan last year. We, like many other people, were extremely excited to see that the Advanced Child Tax Credit was included in that proposal. We wanted to know however we could help out in the planning and the implementation of that important proposal. And at the time, we had been running Get Your Refund, which is our online free tax preparation service that partners with the VITA program and works with VITA volunteers all across the country. For those not familiar, VITA is the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, a partnership with the IRS and nonprofits across the country. And through that work, we have learned a lot about reaching what we referred to then as non-filers, people outside the tax system. Now we prefer to refer to them as new filers, because now everyone is in the tax system thanks to all these tax benefits that have been expanded. And what we had learned was it's very difficult to reach these folks and get them into the system through traditional means. To get new filers to do a full tax return required documents, it required ID for the VITA program, it required a lot of barriers that may seem simple to most of us, but in fact were very hard and difficult for many of these new filers to surmount. So we, like many people, had the hypothesis that simplified filing might be the way to unlock reaching these new filers and helping them access not only the Advanced Child Tax Credit, but obviously the stimulus payments that came before that. So we wanted to do this at scale, but we knew through the VITA program we were limited by volunteers, so we wanted to try simplified filing by getting an e-filer certification through the IRS. We had no idea what this would entail or how long it would take, but surprisingly, it actually happened a lot quicker than we ever could imagine, and we started building quickly. Fortunately, the program began in July, and fortunately, the IRS stepped up again and offered their own non-filer portal in time for those payments to be distributed to get that started. We came a little bit later. We began beta testing in August and then launched in September in partnership with Gene's team, with the Treasury, and with the IRS to really launch a massive outreach campaign, working with important agencies, federal agencies like the Social Security Administration, working with state benefit agencies, racial equity organizations, and nonprofit partners across the country to get the word out about this. And it turned out to be a huge success. In 2.5 months, we were able to help over 115,000 families access their tax benefits for a total of over $440 million in that short period of time. And if that wasn't enough, actually the biggest takeaway of everything was that simplified filing actually works. The hypothesis was true, that if you make the process simple enough and straightforward enough, that many new filers can actually get through it with little or no assistance to successfully file. And that's where we left. And then just last week, in collaboration with Gene and his team again, we relaunched this, both the tool and the outreach campaign to reach families again this year, which we're very excited about, and to help as many families as possible and reach even more this year in receiving this tremendous tax benefit. So with all that said, Gene, my big question for you to kind of kick this off is including the child tax credit, but also more broadly, because the American Rescue Plan includes many, many provisions impacting families across the country. What are some of the key lessons learned around implementation and delivery from your perspective?
Well, thank you, David. I cannot thank Amanda, David, Gabe, so many others at Code for America, and I'll talk a little bit about that partnership. Why don't I do this? Since you've talked so much, laid out so much on the child tax credit, why don't I go more directly in this first question on the child tax credit, and then maybe we can come back and talk about some of the larger lessons. You know, my guess is that there's a lot of people in this audience who, like me, are somewhere between disappointed and heartbroken over the lack of extension of the American Rescue Plan Child Tax Credit so far. But I think it's extremely important to not fail to recognize some of the lessons that were learned, some positive lessons. First of all, you know, when I came in, you know, this obviously kept me up at night. I would say to people, if the child tax credit doesn't go right, it doesn't really, you know, you could do a whole lot of other programs in a $1.9 trillion program, and it won't go as well. And there was an out for us. Congress had only said that we had to do periodic payments. But we understood what the mission was. One cannot underestimate the fact that we have shown the United States, really the world, that you can give a monthly child tax credit. I think for a lot of people in this room, like me, you almost knew too much. You knew that some of the advanced pilots with the EITC had not gone so well. Sometimes that was just an advance of 6 months. The idea that you were going to do monthly. I mean, this had, you know, ACA website written all over it. And let's just recognize what happened. 4 months after the passage of the bill, we actually were able to deliver, you know, with obviously the hard work of our team, but the Treasury policy team and the IRS ultimately had to implement a monthly tax credit that went out to 61 million families, you know, 61 million children, virtually every month. Also, we decided to do it on the same day, which wasn't even something we were really asked by Congress or advocates to do, but it was critical. It was going to be on the 15th of every month. You could count on it. You could know it was there. Direct deposit is a blessing, you know, 85, 90%. From an oversight perspective, you have 16 times less loss or fraud or mistakes with direct deposits towards checks. That's a more general lesson. But, you know, so first of all, one shouldn't, you know, with our disappointment that we, at this year, we're not having the monthly, we should not fail to recognize that we have shown it can be done. And we've seen the benefits. Even when you think of like the Columbia, the excellent people at Columbia, you know, how many of us had thought about monthly poverty rates before the child tax credit? It wasn't really a concept that we talked about. We all would wait for the, you know, to find out in the beginning of October what happened the year before. The idea of tracking monthly. The idea that people would, that you could have less predatory lending, more ability to deal with things that kept you out of the workforce, from cars that didn't work to childcare things with a monthly payment. These are all, I think, you know, really important lessons that have been learned. They're banked, and the fact that we're disappointed it's not being extended now should not take back on the good that that's done and what that could mean for the future. Now, I think the other thing that we learned together was the challenge, and we're still learning this. We're learning this now. We're learning this in Puerto Rico, and again, I know there's like going to be an industry of like lessons learned, and I would just say if somebody has like a really crisp, clear, non-agonized lessons learned, they're probably not that accurate. I mean, stuff is tough and it's hard and it's more nuanced. So one of the things that we've learned is that you need really a first mile and a last mile strategy. You need high tech and high touch. And you have to look at the particular population you're dealing with. So, good news. There are a whole lot of low-income people in this country, modest-income people, that will go to any measure to get assistance that is available to them. So if you advertise, if you provide a clean link, a whole lot of people will go there. And so you can have a great outreach strategy. And I think right now in Puerto Rico with the child tax credit, getting the word out has led to historic numbers coming in. But it doesn't lead to everybody coming in. And then you have to recognize So you have to recognize that and then figure out what is your strategy. So in our case, we were dealing with a population of Americans who had not signed up for all three of the economic impact payments. So I'm cheating and skipping to another lesson learned, which is that cross-enrollment is the most efficient, difficult, but when you can do it, most effective measure. All the work we did was great. The best implementation policy decision that I think we made was that we pushed, and IRS eventually agreed that if a parent had signed up for their economic impact payment, their child would automatically be included. That meant 730,000 kids who might have been excluded were automatically included. So one can't underestimate the power and importance of that. But what else did it mean? It meant that everybody that we weren't trying to reach was someone who had not signed up for 3 economic impact payments in a row in the middle of a pandemic. So the notion that just advertising, just getting it out there was going to be enough was not going to be effective. So we listened, we talked to groups, and really what we found was you needed everything. You needed to alleviate people's concerns, their misunderstandings, their fears, and then you also needed to help them sign up. We were very happy when we kind of, at the end, got, the IRS agreed to put up a simplified filing. And as is appropriate of the advocacy community, we were cheered wildly and loudly for about 10 days. And then everybody said, rightly, this isn't a very good simplified filing for the child tax credit, even though it was the first ever in 20 years, because it didn't have Spanish, it wasn't mobile friendly. And you all did so much to help us fix that, and in a way that we couldn't have done because we didn't have the government resources or time, and that was a huge contribution. But it also put in place why were people not doing it, what were the strategies with trusted messengers, texting, et cetera, to get people's attention, who could we get to, why were people not filing? And I think we all learned together, because we talk weekly, all the groups and White House and Treasury talk every single week, and we do the same. Unidos and us co-host one with Puerto Rico. So we are constantly listening and learning together. And we've realized this is real work, but it is achievable. And I do think in a lot of ways, the benefit you had wasn't just having the simplified filing, but that you were addressing the misunderstanding, that you had a chat line, that you were kind of incorporating first mile and last mile strategies at the same time. But I think that work will continue. I think we've made a lot of progress, but I think when the amounts of funds are so great, we should be in pain even if it's just 10% who are not getting there. And if we're all honest with ourselves, those numbers are even higher for most other poverty programs that have not gotten the attention that Child Tax Credit Outreach has.
Yeah, those are all great points, Gene. We only have a couple minutes left, but I would love to hear kind of going forward with that. You've mentioned the future of the child tax credit is uncertain, but where do we go from here? How do we build on this regardless of what the status of the child tax credit is to continue to make sure, all the work you've done previously on the earned income tax credit and plenty of state credits as well, how do we make sure that we continue to increase access to
Well, I think on the outreach, we have to realize that it is challenging. And we all have to understand that that's not an excuse for not going forward, but that, it doesn't happen overnight. And, what you guys did was great, but we know there's more numbers out there. So I think we have to learn, again, what are the best trusted messenger first mile strategies? What are the in-person strategies that we need to do? And then what is the ability? We had $1 billion in Build Back Better for outreach. You need actual resources to do it. It's harder to ask other departments. They're not even allowed to spend their sources on other benefits. So I think we need a greater commitment. And, if I have a minute to go through some of overall lessons learned, that would be a generic lessons learned. I think that number one, we really need to devote dedicated resources in any emergency program to a low-income population for navigators, counselors, direct. You just can't predict all the things that are going to happen, the difficulty, the confusion. So the idea that navigators is associated with the ACA, we need to change that. And you can't just make the money available. We spend all our time telling people you can use state and local money, you can use ERA money, you can use these funds. They don't do it enough. You should have, when you have the amount you're going to do, take a little less and devote a certain amount to navigators, to counselors, to those type of things. And I'll just give a few other kind of overall lessons learned, which is don't do first come first serve programs ever. If you do, like with small business loans, if you do them, the most sophisticated people will get there first every time. You'll crash websites. Kind of imagine what would happen if Stanford decided that admissions would be based on first come, first serve. Can you imagine the consulting industry that would go about how to get there 1 second earlier? And do you think their website could stand a million people coming in the first hour? Those are things people do, which when you're doing implementation, you see the lack of inequity. The underinvestment in government services and professionalization. People may not care, but now you have to ask people, what's going to happen when there's a crisis? If you underinvested so much in unemployment insurance, even if it had only been twice the demand, not 10 times the demand that what hits, what happens? The other thing I think which is really relevant is, I wrote a chapter on this for Results for America at one point, which is, everybody in this room knows that, gold standards, kind of random controlled experiments, et cetera. I used to think of, there's that, but when I'm in this job, I thought more about Mike Tyson's line. People come at me with a lot of strategy, and then I hit them in the face. And I kind of think you're in this job, there's a lot of evaluations and stuff you do, but life is hitting you in the face. And you're a little bit more like maybe a general or something. You don't have the ability to see how this battle plays out. And so this is where I really think the outreach and the connection with the advocacy community is so important. We were in constant touch. On the emergency rental assistance, we called constantly, everybody. There are people like Diane Yentell who do a good job of calling us. But with child tax credit, we met constantly. I think you have to get the best information you can. It will be imperfect, but if you don't change quickly, you just let a program fail. The emergency rental assistance turned around in terms of speed. On the child tax credit, we were able to work with you to get, thanks to you, to Amanda and you and Gabe, others, we were able to get the mobile-friendly and in Spanish website. We also all learned together that that wasn't enough. And every lesson we learned together. So I do think when you're in an emergency situation like this, you need to be evidence-based. It's going to be imperfect, but getting the feedback and evidence from the ground can give you indications that can allow you to change guidance, change course in a timely way that can turn things around. And so one cannot underestimate the importance of that feedback and why the kind of partnerships are not just like an outreach strategy or not just, a nice, kind of Office of Public Engagement strategy. It's what you actually need to do to get the best evidence on the ground, what is happening, so that you can make real-time changes in programs that are life and death for people who are low income and stressed, and Congress has given them a benefit, and it's up to us, as President Biden tells us every day, to not be satisfied with the legislation, but only be satisfied when that benefit actually lifts the poverty, the well-being, the opportunity of the people it's intended for.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks so much, Gene, for joining us. Yeah.